"Do you also cry from hunger?" asked the 10-year-old black beggar to the millionaire, who was mourning his son. The rain fell relentlessly on the streets of Manhattan when David Thompson, CEO of the largest financial technology company on the East Coast, collapsed in tears in the middle of Wall Street. At 42 years old, with an estimated fortune of $2 billion, he sat there crying like a lost child, soaked, vulnerable, and completely broken. That's when a small figure approached him, a black girl, about 10 years old, barefoot and wearing ragged clothes, held a piece of stale bread in her hands, the only meal she'd likely have that day. "Sir, are you crying because you're hungry too?" she asked with devastating innocence, holding out half of her bread to the man in his completely soaked $3,000 suit. David raised his bloodshot eyes and met the child's worried gaze. For an absurd moment, the richest man in New York was being comforted by someone who clearly had nowhere to sleep that night. "No, little one," he replied, his voice breaking. "It's not hunger." "Then it's longing," she said with a wisdom far beyond her age. "My grandmother always told me there are only two kinds of tears, hunger tears and missing tears." Those simple words pierced through all of David's defenses. That day marked exactly 1 year since he had lost custody of his son Michael to his ex-wife, who had moved to London and taken the 8-year-old boy with her. "What's your name?" David asked, wiping his face with the back of his hand. "Destiny," she replied with a gap-toothed smile. "And you?" "David. Nice to meet you, Destiny." The girl studied his face for a few seconds, as if deciding whether she could trust him. Then, with a decisive gesture, she broke the bread in half and insisted on offering him a piece. "I can't cure your longing, but I can share my bread," she said. "Food shared always feeds the heart more than the stomach." David accepted, the bread a lump forming in his throat. Here he was, one of the most powerful men on Wall Street, receiving charity from a child who probably hadn't had a proper meal in days. "Destiny, where do you live?" The girl's smile faded slightly. "Everywhere and nowhere," she replied, with unsettling maturity. "Since my mother disappeared, I've learned to fend for myself." "Your mother disappeared?" David's concern was evident. "About 6 months ago," she said quietly. "She used to clean offices in buildings like this one." Destiny pointed to the FinTech Solutions skyscraper behind him. "One day, an elegant lady gave her some chocolates. She ate them and became very strange. The next day, some men in suits came and said they were taking her to a doctor. I never saw her again." A chill ran down David's spine. Something about that story felt disturbingly familiar. "And no one took care of you after that?" "They tried to put me in a shelter, but I ran away. The kids fought all the time, and the adults didn't care about us." As they talked, David discreetly observed how easily Destiny moved through her surroundings. She knew every corner of that area, every safe spot, every danger. A 10-year-old child had survived on the streets of Manhattan for 6 months. "Do you have a place to stay? Tonight? It's going to rain heavily." Destiny shrugged. "I always manage. There's a gap under the overpass that keeps me dry." David made an instant decision. "How about coming to dinner with me? I have an apartment nearby, and I promise it's safe." Destiny's eyes narrowed. She had learned not to trust adults easily. "Why would you do that for me? You don't even know me." Her directness stunned him, but the answer came naturally. "Because you shared your bread with me when you thought I was hungry. Because today is a very sad day for me, and you made me feel a little better. And because no child should be alone on the streets." Destiny considered this, then nodded. "Okay, but if you try anything weird, I'll scream and run." "Fair enough," David said with a faint smile, standing and offering his hand. As they walked together through the wet streets toward his Upper East Side apartment, David couldn't shake the unease creeping over him. A black child, living alone after her mother vanished, chocolates from an elegant lady, men in suits. This didn't feel like chance. Destiny was hiding something. Behind that innocence was a child who understood far too much about the world. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "David, you're worrying me. What exactly are we talking about?" "1 hour, Tom, and bring everything you can find on child abduction protocols." The second call was to Rebecca Chun, Director of Corporate Security at FinTech Solutions. Rebecca had spent 10 years with the FBI before David recruited her, and her loyalty was unquestionable. "Rebecca, I need you to discreetly send me a list of all contract cleaning staff from the last 2 years, especially black women between the ages of 25 and 40. Is this related to an internal investigation? Maybe. And Rebecca, keep this between us for now." When Destiny came out of the shower wearing a bathrobe David had found, she looked like a completely different child, her hair clean, her face washed. Something about her resemblance nagged at him, but he couldn't quite place it. "Destiny, do you remember your mother's full name?" "Jasmine Washington," she replied, sitting at the table where David had prepared a simple dinner. "Everyone on the street called her Jazz." David almost choked on his coffee. Jasmine Washington. That name was familiar, very familiar. He had seen it recently in the monthly executive reports on outsourced employees. "Destiny, what floor of my building did your mother work on specifically?" The girl frowned, trying to remember. "She always talked about a very high floor, where important meetings were held. She said she could sometimes hear people talking through the doors." David's blood ran cold. The 42nd floor, the executive meeting room. Only 5 people had unrestricted access. Himself, Vice President Victoria Ashford, CFO James Harrison, HR Director Patricia Wells, and... Did she ever mention specific names? Anyone who gave her the chocolates? Destiny nibbled thoughtfully on her sandwich. She said it was a very elegant lady with gray hair, always pulled back in a tight bun. She wore expensive glasses and spoke to all the female employees like they were dumb children. David felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. The description fit perfectly with Victoria Ashford, his 58-year-old vice president, his mentor when he founded the company 15 years ago. Victoria, who had helped him build a financial empire. Victoria, who had full access to every system in the company. Destiny, did your mother ever mention hearing anything specific at those meetings? The girl's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, David noticed an intelligence far sharper than he expected from a 10-year-old. "Mr. David," she said carefully, "do you think the lady who gave my mother the chocolates is the same person who works at your company?" The directness of the question caught him off guard. Destiny was connecting the dots with startling speed. "It's possible," he admitted. "And if it's true, we'll find out what really happened to your mother." At that moment, the intercom buzzed. It was Thomas Mitchell. "Tom's here," David said. "He's my lawyer and someone I trust completely. Can you repeat everything you told me to him?" Destiny nodded solemnly, as if she understood the weight of the moment. Thomas Mitchell entered, a tall, thin man with gray hair and piercing eyes that had silenced prosecutors in court for decades. He listened without interruption as David recounted everything, taking occasional notes. "Let me get this straight," Thomas finally said. "An outsourced employee at your company disappears after eating chocolates given to her by someone who may be your vice president. Her daughter survives 6 months on the streets. And you think this connects to... what exactly?" David took a deep breath. 3 months ago, Victoria started pressuring me to sell my majority stake in the company. She said it was time to bring in institutional investors. I refused. Last week, she hinted that maybe I should reconsider before compromising. Information came to light. Thomas and David exchanged a grim look. In the corporate world, compromising information often meant blackmail. "You think Jasmine Washington may have witnessed something that compromises Victoria?" Thomas asked. "Not just that." David pulled out his laptop. "Rebecca just sent me the list of outsourced employees. Jasmine Washington was fired on the very day Destiny said she disappeared. Alleged reason: breach of confidentiality protocol. Thomas leaned forward to study the screen. That means Victoria knew exactly who Jasmine was and had motive to silence her. There's more. David scrolled through files. Jasmine was assigned to clean the executive meeting room every Tuesday and Thursday, the same days Victoria held private strategy sessions with outside investors. Destiny, who had been quiet, finally spoke up. My mother always said powerful people do bad things when they think no one's watching. She was seeing something she shouldn't have, wasn't she? The simple wisdom silenced both men. David, Thomas said gravely, if your suspicions are right, we're looking at a conspiracy, not just a power struggle. This is about eliminating witnesses to cover up corporate crimes. David nodded, his eyes flashing with the determination Thomas recognized from years of courtroom battles. Tom, I want you to file for temporary custody of Destiny immediately and hire the best private investigator in New York. And unofficially? Thomas asked. David's lips curved into a smile. Cold, humorless. Unofficially, Victoria Ashford has no idea who she's really up against. She knew him as the successful CEO and absent father. She had no idea what he was truly capable of when someone threatened an innocent child. While Thomas jotted down notes about the next legal steps, David watched Destiny, who was quietly working on a puzzle he had given her. The girl occasionally glanced up at the adults with an expression that seemed to understand far more of the situation than she should have. There was something in those eyes, an intelligence, a maturity forged by survival, that made David suspect Destiny was hiding important information. Perhaps her mother had shared more with her than a child should ever know about what she had witnessed during those meetings. Each new discovery only intensified his conviction that this encounter in the rain had not been accidental. Victoria had underestimated the power of truth to emerge from the shadows, and now she was about to discover that separating a mother from her daughter had been the greatest strategic mistake of her career. Over the next 3 days, David Thompson transformed into something Victoria Ashford had never seen before. A quietly meticulous and dangerously focused CEO. While she believed she had intimidated him with veiled threats about compromising information, David was secretly building the most devastating case of his career. Rebecca Chun had become his most valuable ally. Not only did the former FBI agent confirm that Jasmine Washington had worked specifically on the days of Victoria's private meetings, she discovered something even more sinister. 3 other contract employees had also been terminated for breach of confidentiality in the last 2 years. All of them after working on the 42nd floor. David, this is no coincidence, Rebecca said at their latest secret meeting in his apartment. We're talking about a systematic pattern of witness elimination. Destiny, who had adapted surprisingly well to her new routine, was in the living room doing homework when she overheard fragments of the conversation. David had managed to discreetly enroll her in a nearby private school, using his influence to bypass the usual bureaucratic delays. Mr. David, she called during dinner that night, can I tell you something important about my mom? David and Rebecca, who had stayed for dinner, gave the girl their full attention. Mom always kept important things in a little notebook she hid under our mattress, Destiny said softly. She told me that when you hear things you shouldn't, you have to write them down so you don't forget. David's heart raced. Destiny, do you know where that notebook is now? When the men came for her, I managed to grab a few things before I ran away from the shelter, Destiny explained. The notebook is in a backpack I hid in a safe place. Rebecca and David exchanged a glance heavy with meaning. If Jasmine had documented what she witnessed, this could be the definitive proof they needed. Can you take us there? Rebecca asked gently. The next day, Destiny guided them through a series of alleys and underground passages to an old abandoned subway tunnel. There, carefully hidden behind a loose grate, was a small, worn backpack. Inside, along with some clothes and family photos, they found a hardcover notebook filled with Jasmine's meticulous notes. The pages contained dates, times, names, and detailed summaries of conversations she had overheard while cleaning. October 23rd, Victoria met with men with Russian accents. They talked about moving money to offshore accounts. They mentioned laundering $50 million through shell companies. November 15th, Victoria argued on the phone with someone named Martinez. She said that if he didn't cooperate, accidents happened to people who talk too much. December 2nd, Victoria showed photos of a bank account in the Cayman Islands to a man in a gray suit. She laughed, saying David would never suspect her because he trusted her like a sister. David felt his blood boil with every page. Victoria wasn't just trying to force him to sell the company. She was using fintech solutions as a front for an international money laundering operation. "There's more," Rebecca said, pointing to the last entry, dated the day Jasmine disappeared. January 15th. Victoria found out I've been listening to her conversations. She offered me chocolates today, said they were special, imported. They tasted strange, kind of bitter. I'm feeling dizzy. If anything happens to me, Destiny is staying with the neighbor next door. Please, someone take care of my little girl. The silence that followed was broken by Destiny's small voice. She knew something bad was going to happen, didn't she? David knelt beside the girl, holding her hands. "Your mother was very smart, Destiny, and very brave. She documented everything so that one day the truth would come out." Meanwhile, Victoria Ashford was making the most arrogant mistake of her career. Believing she had eliminated any threat with Jasmine's disappearance, she intensified her pressure on David, sending increasingly direct messages about her intention to take control of the company. "David, I hope you've reconsidered our conversation about professionalizing fintech's management. It would be a shame if certain tax irregularities at the company came to light just as we are negotiating with international investors." What Victoria didn't know was that David had discreetly installed monitoring software on all company systems. Every email she sent, every call from corporate phones, every server access was being recorded and automatically forwarded to Rebecca. Meanwhile, Thomas Mitchell had compiled an impressive legal dossier. In addition to evidence of money laundering, they now had documentation of attempted murder, kidnapping of a minor, corporate blackmail, and international criminal conspiracy. "David, this goes beyond Victoria," Thomas explained during an evening meeting. "The connections we've uncovered suggest a criminal network operating through several legitimate companies. Victoria is just one piece, but an important one. How long do you need to make sure that when we strike, she has no way to escape?" 2 more days. "I need to coordinate with the FBI and the federal prosecutor's office. When we do this, it has to be perfect." That night, David tucked Destiny into bed and read her a bedtime story, as had become tradition. But this time, she surprised him with a question that caught him off guard. "Mr. David, when you catch the bad woman who hurt my mom, will you still be my temporary dad?" The simple question carried an emotional weight that hit David like a bolt of lightning. In just 1 week, this extraordinary child had filled a void in his life he hadn't even realized existed. "Destiny, if you want me to, I would love to be your dad forever, not just temporarily." The smile that spread across the little girl's face was brighter than all the lights in Manhattan. The next day, Victoria made her final mistake. Frustrated by David's apparent passivity, she called an emergency board meeting, planning to force a vote to remove him as company president. "I need everyone to be present tomorrow at 10 a.m., she wrote in an email to all board members. "We have urgent matters concerning the company's leadership that can no longer be put off." David read the email with a smile that Rebecca would later describe as absolutely predatory. Victoria had just dug her own grave by calling exactly the meeting he needed to expose her publicly in front of all the relevant witnesses. "Rebecca, call Thomas. It's time to put our plan into action. And Destiny will go to school as usual tomorrow. When she comes back, all this will be over, and we can finally start looking for her mother." David was convinced Jasmine Washington was still alive. Victoria was too calculating to commit outright murder, when forced confinement in a psychiatric clinic was a cleaner and more controllable solution. While Victoria slept peacefully in her penthouse, believing that the next day she would finally take complete control of fintech solutions, David remained awake, finalizing the last details of a revenge that would be served with the surgical precision of a scalpel and the devastating force of a tsunami. For 15 years, Victoria had underestimated David, seeing him as a brilliant but naive young man who depended on her guidance. Now she was about to discover that she had created a monster, not of cruelty, but of relentless justice. And the price for terrorizing an innocent child would be paid with compound interest in the form of public humiliation and total destruction. The FinTech Solutions boardroom had never witnessed anything so devastating. Victoria Ashford entered, confidently at 10 a.m., carrying a briefcase full of forged documents she planned to use to frame David for tax irregularities. Her plan was simple: force a vote of no confidence and take control of the company. "Gentlemen of the board," she began in her usual authoritative voice, "I have called this meeting to discuss the incompetence of leadership that is putting our company at risk." David remained calm in his chair, watching Victoria expose herself more and more. At his side, Thomas Mitchell waited for the right moment to act. "I have evidence that David has been making questionable decisions that could compromise our international investors," Victoria continued, opening her briefcase. "I believe it's time for a change in leadership." That's when David slowly stood up. "Victoria, how interesting that you mention international investors, especially considering your secret meetings with Russian criminal organizations." Victoria's face paled instantly. "What are you talking about?" David motioned to Thomas, who activated a projector. The first page of Jasmine Washington's notebook appeared on the screen, filled with clear handwriting documenting conversations about money laundering. "This is the handwriting of Jasmine Washington, the contract employee you eliminated because she heard too much," David said, his tone icy enough to make Victoria recoil. "That's ridiculous. I never—" "October 23rd, David read aloud. "Victoria met with men with Russian accents. They talked about moving $50 million through shell companies." The other board members exchanged shocked glances. Victoria tried to compose herself, but her voice trembled. "Anyone can fake notes," Thomas Mitchell smiled predatorily. "That's why we brought the recordings." Audio filled the room, Victoria's unmistakable voice discussing illegal bank transfers, threatening witnesses, and planning to use fintech solutions as a front for international criminal operations. "Impossible! How did you get this?" "Rebecca Chun, our security director, installed monitoring systems throughout the company a week ago," David explained calmly. "Every phone call, every email, every access to the servers has been recorded." Victoria looked desperately around the table but found only horrified faces staring back at her. "You don't understand. I built this company together with David." "You built a criminal scheme using my company," David corrected her. "And when Jasmine Washington found out, you poisoned her and had her committed to a psychiatric clinic under a false identity." The door opened, and 2 federal agents entered the room. "Victoria Ashford, you are under arrest for conspiracy, money laundering, attempted murder, and kidnapping a minor." Victoria tried to run, but tripped over her own arrogance, crashing onto the conference table. "David, please, we can work this out. I taught you everything." "You taught me to recognize people like you," David replied coldly, watching as the handcuffs clicked shut. And you taught me that sometimes justice needs a little help. As Victoria was dragged down the hallways, screaming about her innocence, David turned to his advisors in silence. Gentlemen, I apologize for allowing a criminal to infiltrate our company, but I assure you, starting today, FinTech Solutions will be a model of corporate transparency. Rebecca Chun entered the room carrying more documents. David, we found Victoria's offshore accounts, $2.3 billion in illegal transactions over the last 5 years. The silence in the room was deafening. Victoria Ashford, the respected matriarch of Manhattan business, had just been exposed as one of the biggest financial criminals of the decade. And Jasmine Washington? David asked. We have the location of the clinic. The rescue operation is scheduled for this afternoon, came the reply. For the first time in days, David smiled. Destiny would finally have her mother back. Victoria, meanwhile, would lose everything, her fortune, her reputation, her freedom. And she had just learned the most expensive lesson of her life. Never underestimate a father desperate for justice. But as Victoria was taken away to face decades in prison, one question lingered. Would Jasmine Washington ever fully recover from years of forced sedation? And what kind of reunion awaited mother and daughter after so much suffering? 3 months later, David watched from the garden of his apartment as Destiny and Jasmine laughed and played together. Jasmine had fully recovered, and now mother and daughter lived with him as his official family. The adoption paperwork was finalized. Daddy. David! Destiny called, running up to him. Mommy said I can choose the decor for my new room. Daddy. David. 2 simple words that filled the void left after a year of separation from Michael. And soon, Michael would be back to meet his new sister. Even Mariana had agreed to regular visits after seeing how much David had changed. FinTech Solutions was thriving under its new ethical leadership. Without Victoria's sabotage, the company had doubled in value within 3 months, attracting global investors impressed by the radical transparency David had implemented. Victoria Ashford, on the other hand, was facing 25 years in federal prison. Her assets were confiscated, her reputation destroyed, her former allies long gone. The woman who had once controlled Wall Street now languished in a cell, financially and socially broken. You know, Jasmine said one evening over dinner, when I was in that clinic, I kept myself alive by thinking about destiny. I never imagined I would find not only my daughter, but an entire family. David smiled, looking at the 2 people who had transformed his life. Victoria had tried to destroy him through blackmail, but instead she had given him the greatest gift of all, a family. The real revenge wasn't destroying Victoria. It was building something she could never understand, genuine love, a real family, and success built on solid values. Sometimes, life places the right people in our path exactly when we need them most. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove the best response to cruelty is to build something beautiful and lasting.